What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And I've hesitated to get into this in a video, but let's talk about these mass shootings and let's try to have an honest conversation, not a political one, not a political party one. I don't subscribe to none of that nonsense, right? And I don't think any politicians have the answer. So we'll just get that off the board to begin with, and just talk, man. As a parent that has kids in school, this is a particular topic that's of importance to me, right? As somebody from the neighborhood, because there's mass shootings in the hood too. A mass shooting defined as any situation that hits four or more people. Um, and I care about that as well, right? I've been on the receiving end of bullets, I've been on the delivering end of them, and neither one of them is good. And but also just as a human being, right? You shouldn't have to have a kid or have a kid in school to worry about what happens to kids in school, right? I would hope that's a concern of everybody. So nonetheless, I'm gonna get into it. And I try to look at stuff from an academic perspective. Like I like research, right? I like when research has been done. Um, I like data, right? And data is not always perfect, it's not always exact, but it's more helpful than politicians, in my opinion. And so I found a couple of things. I'm gonna share a few things with you. I don't expect this to be a long video, and I'm gonna give some of my perspective and thoughts as well. So one of the things, this is it's from Harvard and some other universities. I'm not gonna bore you with what school says what and what the professor's name is, because nobody really gives a shit. Um, but they say that the body of research is limited, right? There's very little money. So sepsis, which is a rare thing actually in people, but you get it from like having surgery in a hospital and unclean stuff. You can get sepsis, which is a deadly infection. I had sepsis after one of my surgeries. And so there's research on that, right? Gun violence research is 0.7% of the amount of money that's spent on researching sepsis. And so there's just not a lot to it. And a lot of that has to do with politics, which I'll get into later. But so mass shootings also is a very small portion of gun violence research to begin with, because mass shootings account for less than 1% of the 40,000 people that die through gun violence each year. Actually, most of those are people that took their own life. And so there's not a lot of money out there for this stuff. And when there is, it's just not used a lot on mass shootings. So this science is this data is based on what's available. And there is stuff available, but it's not funded well enough. And so anyways, everybody knows in the US, different states have different gun laws, right? And so that actually gives researchers an opportunity to kind of compare states and see what laws seem to have an impact. And so these guys analyzed more than 30 years of data on shootings that involve four or more victims, right? And they compare the states and a lot of the other stuff. And what they found is that two policies, did have a significant protective effect, right, in lowering fatal mass shootings. One is requiring gun purchasers to go through a licensing process, right? It requires you to apply, to some degree, kind of engage in law enforcement, even though that might not be personal. And a lot of times there's kind of safety training requirements, all that sort of stuff. So the licensing process, which is a little bit different than background checks, even though upwards of 80% of people in the US support background checks, but it's more the licensing, right? Another thing is large capacity magazines and ammunition feeding devices for semis. And it's just kind of common sense. If a shooter got to stop and reload, then the people that they're targeting could escape or fight back or something, right? And so the less often they got to reload, the more fatal that they can be. And again, that's looking at 30 years across the states. So what is the stuff that doesn't necessarily work, right? That research doesn't support, but that gets talked about a lot. One is comprehensive background checks, right? Like this big thing and delays and all that stuff, which is a little bit different than the licensing. There's no research to show that reduces these crimes, that reduces mass shootings, right? It really doesn't help. And then another thing people talk about is, hey, we should have everybody carry guns. It should be easier for people to have concealed carry permits so that they can defend themselves and this and that. Again, the data doesn't support that. And in some situations, it shows higher rates of fatal mass shootings because you have more people that are allowed to walk around with straps that are tucked, right? And very rarely does a civilian break up a mass shooting because they got a banger on them. That is very, 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 very rare. What are the other things they talk about, right? Having police officers on campus and having students go through drills. I know all my kids have been through drills. When I was a kid, I'm in California, and when I was a kid, the big thing was earthquake drills and stop, drop, and roll, right? Now all my kids have mass shooter drills, and I used to hate the idea of it, but actually I kind of am in favor of it because anything that might help them survive an incident. But there's no real strong research that says having police on site or armed security on site or having students go through those drills really makes any difference. Keeping guns away from young people, right? There's violent gun offenses, the average age, the most common age is between 18 and 21. And so you would think keeping them away from young people would be helpful. And there's some truth to that. It was public health risks associated with young people drinking that got the alcohol ban, to be 21. A lot of states you can, like this dude, was able to go into a store and legally buy a semi-automatic, just days after his 18th birthday, right? And so age restrictions might work, but honestly, there's not a big data set to be able to evaluate that. So it's kind of like, you would think it would help, but really don't have the numbers to back up one way or the other. And so one policy that has a little bit of evidence is letting police take away guns from people who seem to pose an imminent danger. So there was a study in California that looked at how this process got used over a 2-year period, found 21 occasions when it was done over 2 years in response to threats of a mass shooting. Several of those involved schools. But you don't know if taking the guns away actually prevented mass shootings, right? That's another area that researchers really want to dig into, but they can't. And so what I was saying before, a study in 2017 found that guns killed about as many people each year as sepsis, a life-threatening response to infection. But funding for gun violence research was at about 0.7%. And they said, finally, there's so many things to study in the gun area, and we've not had nearly enough studies for 25 years. Once you scratch the surface right now about what is known, we really know very little. And so I think that's some important information, right? And I'm gonna give you guys a little bit more information. Hopefully I'm not boring you, man. This is important stuff, right? So far, when I said dozens, actually so far this year, there's been 230 mass shootings, right? Which again is 4 people or more. In 2021, there were 692. In 2020, there were 610. I'm kind of surprised about the number of those, the number of those considering COVID, right? So I'm a little bit surprised, but it is what it is. And obviously gun control advocates have been touting all kinds of stuff, right? Mandatory background checks, expanding restrictions on people who have them. The real gun control type people, like Democrats, basically, they want abusive dating partners, people with hate crimes, people with mental illness, all sorts of sort of folks barred from buying firearms. I think personally that can go too far. I think that giving the local police or the government that kind of power to make those determinations can go pretty far. And I think it also runs the risk, for example, in the case of mental illness, it runs the risk of people not getting the help that they need for fear of being labeled crazy and not being able to get a banger, right? And once you start saying there's some restrictions for people with mental illness in particular, that's a slippery slope, man. What else are you gonna restrict them from doing, right? Can they not drive cars now? Can they not have kids, right? Like, can they not parent kids? There's a lot, and the government is not known for sticking to what it says a law is for, right? Look at 3 strikes, And so I hesitate to give the government power. That's my personal view. And it's not politics. It's just an understanding of government and an honest recognition of how things go in this country. So I'm not excited to give them that kind of power. I do think that there's room for some stuff like the stuff I was saying with the research. You got to show Americans the numbers, man. You got to show people in this country the numbers and then let them make an informed decision. The problem is half the country gives a shit about politics, and the other half of the country is so committed to their party that unless the numbers tickle their ears, they're not going to believe it. And so let's look at some other things, right? 84%, when you ask American voters, do you support universal background checks for gun purchases? 84% say yes, right? When you ask them about their thoughts on gun control, on stricter gun control, the numbers change a lot. 52% of Americans support strict gun control. That's the lowest rating since 2014. You talk about banning handguns, which is just not going to happen. That's a ridiculous thought. But if you talk about it, only 19% agree with that, right? And so, again, I don't think America would ever or should ban handguns, right? I'm in favor of the Second Amendment personally. And do I think it gets misinterpreted from its original intent? Absolutely. But am I in favor of going around taking everybody's guns? No, I'm not. I'm in favor of having firearms for what the Second Amendment intended, which is, tyranny, right? And not that I think having a rifle in your house is going to stop you if a tank from the U.S. military comes up to your front door and starts getting at you, right? But yeah, I don't know, man. I'm not ready to strip people of all guns. I think that's foolish. 4 in 10 Americans live in a household with a gun. 30% say they personally own one. There are more firearms floating around than there are people, right? And we all know the politics of it, right? Of what Democrats have tried to pass and what Republicans have blocked and yada, 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 right? Some of that is the NRA, is the funding, right? Some of that is politics in the sense of dollars, not loyalty to a belief system, but just dollars. A large reason, and this is well documented. A large reason that there is not more funding towards gun violence is because a lot of funding comes from the government, and the government can't agree on shit. And the NRA has repeatedly said that any buddy in the Republican Party that favors any form of gun control, gun restrictions, gun safety, however you want to phrase it, background checks, anything, that they will pour their incredible resources against that individual in electing a candidate that will not do those things. And you even got some Democrats that's on that page, right? That live in rural states. So that's why there's not funding, right? Because there's no agreement on whether this is an issue or not. And that kind of brings me to this particular incident in Texas. Early on, and I've seen some of this float through my social media. Early on, there was a lot of claims, and some of you guys might have heard this stuff. The shooter was undocumented. The shooter was from El Salvador and was running from a hot one down there. The shooter was running from Border Patrol, and that's why Border Patrol came to the school and got them. All kinds of stuff. None of that is true. That's just factually not true. It's not a matter of opinion. Sometimes things really happen and things really don't. And it's not a difference of opinion. There is truth and there is not truth. This is one of those situations. It's just not fucking true. There was initial claims that the dude was transgender. And so in 4chan and Reddit and some of these other corners, you had people posting pictures of transgender folks saying this, breaking news, exclusive. Here's the shooter. Look at him, right? They're this, they're that. And of course, a bunch of derogatory terms about transgender people or gay people or whatever included in that. and saying that's why he did it, you know, because he was bullied because he's a little, you know, boy girl type or whatever. It's again not true, right? Those pictures are not of the dude who did it. Now, what his get down is in terms of who's attracted to whatever, I know, but those claims came out of thin air, and part of that is because there's a large segment of Americans who, and this is not reduced to a political party, but who want to otherize these shooters, right? They want to distance themselves. These shooters are not American. They're something else, right? They must be weird. They must be different. They must be not American, right? And so they must be an immigrant. They must be some Black Lives Matter person. They must be some transgender person. And if it's a white person, then, you know, they just got mental health issues, right? And so that's all, right? And they're responding to the anti-white narrative that's going on in liberal media. And you know, there's always a twist, right? And on the left, the American left, which ain't left to shit, but the American left, you see the same thing, right? Well, it's all because they had access to a gun. If they didn't have access to a gun, this wouldn't happen. It's all the Republicans' fault that there's mass shooters. Neither one of those things is true, man. Neither one of those things are true, right? But it creates this distraction, and what happens is a lot of people in this country tune out because that's not a productive conversation. A lot of people hear little snippets, and so they run with that, but they're not really engaged, so they don't know what else is being said. And they don't really think critically because they got other shit going on in life. They got bills to pay, they got kids to raise. They, you know, so they catch a little whisper here and there, but they don't stop and really think critically about it. And not always because they're not able to. Sometimes it's just they don't have the capacity. And it's scary. It's scary to think that your kids are in danger when they go to school. Parents don't want to think that. A lot of parents don't. You don't want to dwell on that. And so sometimes you'll try to make it make sense in some other way. But that doesn't do us any favors. That doesn't save a kid's life. That doesn't make a school safer. That doesn't ease the worry of parents and of society in general, and grandparents and cousins and nieces, whatever the fuck, right? That stuff doesn't help, man. We're not ostriches. You can't just stick your head in the sand. And actually, I don't think ostriches do that, but that's just side note. And so what is behind it? Some of those things I think would help, right? I think the licensing process, I think would help, right? And I don't think that's too much of a government overreach. You need a license to drive a car too. And so government has to have some role in people's life. I think it has way too much of a role in a lot of areas, but that doesn't mean it should have zero role, right? So I think licensing for a firearm, personally, I think is a good idea. I'm kind of iffy on the background check stuff because I don't believe that past behavior is an automatic indicator of future behavior. I went to prison at 19 years old for shooting somebody in the neck. I got a video about it. I'll post a link up here. So I would never pass a background check, but I'm 45. Does shooting somebody when I was running around gangbanging at 19 mean that I'm just as likely, like if you give me a banger now, I'm just gonna walk outside and hit somebody in the neck? No. Now I choose to stay away from guns because it's illegal, of course. But you know, so that ain't right. And a lot of these people that do stuff, they don't have backgrounds, you know, and if they have backgrounds, they don't have backgrounds that are considered violent. There's a lot of predatory stuff that some sick people do in terms of you know, indefensible stuff. We call, you know, in prison, we call it indefensible stuff. You guys can read between the lines. Some of that stuff was not counted as a violent crime, you know, which I think is crazy, but some of it's not even counted as a felony. So that stuff wouldn't come up in a background check. But would you want somebody that engages in that type of behavior to be walking around with a thumper? No. I'd rather it be somebody that was running the streets clapping people as a teenager. Shit. So you know, so there's limits, man. Um, I don't like the idea of armed police at a kid's school. I really don't. When I got out of prison, I was working at a high school, or I went up to the juvenile hall in San Mateo County. They called it, I think, YCS Youth Service. I don't know, but it used to be called Hillcrest when I was there as a kid in the 80s. And back then it was different, man. We had counselors, they weren't guards, they wore the street clothes and whatnot. Now it looks like a little mini prison. They got a track and everything, a yard. And my first thought when I went up there to go talk to some kids was, man, they just preparing you for prison, right? They normalizing this shit. I don't like having police at schools. I don't think if a kid gets in a fight at school, he should be at risk for getting an assault charge or going to juvenile hall, right? I just don't like police in schools. There's a school to prison pipeline for a reason, and I don't support that. And my fear is we're gonna say to protect against mass casualty events, we're gonna put the cops at all these schools, and that's gonna fix it. But the cops are not just gonna sit there and wait for a mass casualty event. They're gonna earn their money one way or another, right? And and so that's not cool, man. I saw kids get probation violations when I was young in juvenile hall for not making their bed because the probation officer talked to their mother, and the mother was like, he does a good job listening, but he don't clean his room. And they got a violation, had to spend a weekend in juvenile hall because part of their probation conditions was to listen to their parents and their authority figures. And they didn't by not cleaning their room. It's extreme, but it's not unheard of. I've seen it several times, and that was back then. And so imagine, man, somebody talks back to a teacher and they're on probation, they go to jail. No, so I'm not for that. If the numbers showed that kept school violence from happening, I might consider it, but they don't. And that's the thing, man, is people jump based on emotion instead of reason, instead of logic. We get caught up in these emotional debates and they don't help. What would help is changing the culture in this country around violence. I've been preaching that for a long time. And I think these mass casualty events get, are roped into that too. What would help is an investment in mental health care and non-jail, non-custodial mental health care, community-based mental health care. I did an interview with my homeboy from Pacoima, and I'll link to that, right? Neighborhood therapist. I think it'll be up there. And he talks about he's at Purdue getting a degree in clinical psychology, I believe. And when he's done, he wants to go back to the hood in LA and provide services on a community level. That's what we need, right? We need people that really have skills, but that know our communities and know the struggles of our communities and can have those honest conversations and know the stigmas and know the barriers and can talk to parents, right? In a way that the parents understand. And hey, this ain't just net reels, right? Like this ain't just nerves, bro. Your kid, he's struggling and this is how we can help. And doesn't rush to just throw pills at kids and fix them and I'll see you in 6 months. Like real mental health care. We need that. We need that. And low income communities, no matter what the race, low income communities don't have access to good mental health care. It don't matter if you're a redneck in a trailer in Kentucky, or if you're a black or brown person in the projects in San Francisco, or an Asian or a poly or whoever else, right? It's just not there. When I was in Palo Alto, they had a crisis where a bunch of kids at a high school were jumping in front of the Caltrain, and it didn't end good for them. And they shut down the school. They had the students go, but they shut down the school. They had a bunch of mental health services, all kinds of stuff there to help the students deal with this trauma. We got students, this is before Facebook and all that shit, man. We got folks dropping like flies in the streets in EPA, and kids are supposed to go to school and pick up right where they left off. All right, little Tommy, really nobody named Tommy, but let's do math. And the kids sitting there stressing because their cousin got killed, or their house got raided, or they saw the police chasing their dad down the road, or their mom got deported, or whatever. That's just stressful too. But they're expected to just take it on the chin, right? So we need better mental health care. Like mental health issues are real. My lady and I were talking about it a minute ago, especially for kids, man. COVID was rough. COVID was rough. A lot of kids came through it okay, but no kid came through it unscathed. You know what I mean? That's like, I came out the SUIT program okay, but I know a lot of other people that came out the SUIT program okay after years. But that doesn't mean we came out unscathed. That doesn't mean we came out with no hits and no marks inside, right? It's just some of us have been able to carry ourselves a little different, and that shit comes to haunt later, right? Same with these kids in COVID, you know. They're stressed. There's economic anxiety. Parents are struggling to put food on the table. Shit, I feel that pain, right? Food prices are going up, gas prices are going up, and kids is eating more. You know what I mean? Medical bills, people's income getting set. You guys know, man. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. And those stresses, some people can't deal with, right? In a healthy way. Sometimes those parents are flashing on kids, and those kids are angry and they're mad and they're young. So they don't really realize the true consequence of what they're doing. They're hurting, they're mad, and they want somebody to pay for it. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to teach a lesson. They want all kinds of stuff. And if we're being honest, every one of us has felt that way in our youth, if not in our adulthood. Every one of us has felt that way to some degree. Now, 99.9% of us are not going to do what some of these kids do at schools, but that feeling is legit. And especially for children, they don't handle it right. These dark corners of the internet, man, that 4chan and 3chan and Reddit and all these other places where they feed these youngsters with shit, man. And a lot of youngsters now, their whole life is built around a computer or a phone. They don't have social interactions, especially kids that's a little bit awkward or a little bit different. And I'm not justifying anybody from doing what they do. I'm not trying to make excuses for anybody, but I think we need to have a conversation about the reasons. It's not excuses. It doesn't make it okay. But we could sit and thump our chest and, they fuck these kids and this and that and whatnot. Okay, but it's going to keep happening. Or we could sit back and think, how might we prevent it? Maybe I don't fully understand it. Maybe I don't fully agree with it. But what can I do to help, right? Beyond just walking around with something on my hip and shooting everybody that looks like they might do something, because that's just dangerous, And so you seen the dude, what was his name? Aubrey, he got shot down on the street, killed because he looked dangerous, right? Because he's a black dude jogging around in a white area, so that's not helpful. That might make some people that live in neighborhoods where everybody just looks like them a little happy. But for the rest of the country, that's just not a good idea, right? And so, anyways, man, this is just some of my thoughts. I don't have the answers. I don't pretend to have the answers. It's called the Homie Hangout for a reason. I love and rely on input from you guys. Whether you agree with me or disagree with me, I'm not tripping. Like, hop in the comments, man, and let me know. And I'm going to premiere this, so there'll be a live chat. But by this point, you guys would already know that, and the video's over. Help others move in excellence, man. That's what homies do. And help yourself at the same time, because you're worth it. And help your fucking community, because it needs you, right? It needs you. Take care, man. Check out some of the other content. I got all kinds of stuff.